My name is Brooks Carven, and I used to think the worst thing about corporate life was the coffee. Turns out, I was wrong. The worst thing is when your wife runs the company and decides to believe an intern over you. I'm 38, Chief Technology Officer at Carven Solutions, a mid-sized consulting firm that specializes in financial audits for healthcare companies. The irony isn't lost on me that I spend my days tracking down discrepancies in other people's books, while missing the biggest fraud happening right under my nose. Ember and I built this company together 5 years ago. She's the CEO, the face of the operation, all charm and ambition wrapped in designer suits. I'm the guy who makes sure the servers don't crash and the data stays clean. We were partners in every sense of the word, or so I thought. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I was in my office reviewing security logs when my assistant knocked on the door. "Brooks, Ember wants to see you in her office. She said it's urgent." I grabbed my coffee and walked down the hall to the corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that Ember insisted on when we signed the lease. She was sitting behind her mahogany desk, and standing next to her was Parker, the intern we'd hired 3 months ago straight out of some Ivy League school. Parker was everything I wasn't at 22. Polished, confident, and apparently very good at making himself indispensable to my wife. He had that entitled look that comes from never having to work for anything, the kind of guy who probably had his college essays written by someone else. "Brooks, sit down," Ember said without looking up from her laptop. I sat across from her, noting how Parker remained standing like he was part of some formal proceeding. The whole setup felt wrong, like walking into a meeting you weren't supposed to attend. "We need to discuss a serious allegation," Ember continued, finally meeting my eyes. "Parker has reported inappropriate behavior from you." The words hit me like a system crash. "What kind of inappropriate behavior?" Parker stepped forward, holding a folder. "I've documented several instances of harassment, including inappropriate comments and unwelcome advances." I stared at him, then at Ember. "You're joking." "This isn't a joke, Brooks," Ember said, her voice cold and professional. "I take workplace harassment very seriously." "What exactly am I supposed to have done?" Parker opened his folder and pulled out printed screenshots of what looked like Slack messages. "These are from our direct message thread. You can see the timestamps and the inappropriate nature of the communications." I leaned forward to look at the screenshots. They showed messages from my account to Parker's, but I'd never seen them before in my life. The content was suggestive, unprofessional, and completely fabricated. "I never sent these messages," I said. "The evidence suggests otherwise," Ember replied. "Given the seriousness of these allegations, I'm placing you on administrative leave pending a full investigation." She slid a document across the desk. "You'll need to surrender your access badge, laptop, and any company devices. Security will escort you out." I looked at the paper, then at my wife. "You're actually doing this." "I have to protect the company and our employees," she said. "I hope you understand." What I understood was that something was very wrong. In 5 years of marriage and business partnership, Ember had never spoken to me with such formal distance, and Parker was standing there with a barely concealed smirk, like he was watching his favorite team win. "I want to see the original messages, not screenshots," I said. "That's part of the investigation process," Ember replied. "HR will be in touch about next steps." Security arrived in the form of Janine, our head of building security. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd always been friendly to me. Today, she looked uncomfortable. "Ready, Brooks?" she asked quietly. I stood up and placed my access badge on Ember's desk. "I'll need to get my personal items." "Someone will pack them and send them to you," Ember said without looking up. As I walked toward the door, I turned back. 5 years, Ember. 5 years we've built this together." She finally looked at me, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt? Regret? Then it was gone. "Sometimes people aren't who we think they are," she said. Parker was still smirking as I left the office. The walk through the office was a parade of confused stares and whispered conversations. Word travels fast in a small company, and by the time I reached the elevator, everyone knew something major had happened. Janine rode down with me in silence until we reached the lobby. "For what it's worth," she said as the doors opened, "I don't buy it." "Thanks, Janine. That means something." I walked out of my own company carrying nothing but my car keys and a growing sense that I'd just been played by an expert. That evening, I sat in our apartment, my apartment now, I supposed, and tried to make sense of what had happened. Ember hadn't come home, which wasn't unusual when she was dealing with company crises. What was unusual was that I was the crisis. I opened my laptop and logged into our home network. One advantage of being married to your business partner is that we'd always shared everything, including passwords and system access. Ember had locked me out of company systems, but she couldn't lock me out of what I'd already backed up. I pulled up my personal backup of company communications, something I maintained for disaster recovery purposes. If those screenshots were real, the original messages would be in my backup. If they were fake, I'd be able to prove it. It took me 2 hours to restore the complete Slack archive and rebuild the message threads. What I found was exactly what I expected. No inappropriate messages from me to Parker. The timestamps on his screenshots corresponded to messages I'd actually sent, but the content had been completely altered. More interesting was what else I found in the restored data. Parker and Ember had been exchanging messages for weeks. Not work-related messages, but personal ones. Very personal ones. Messages that made it clear their relationship had moved far beyond professional collaboration. I sat back in my chair and laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because the alternative was throwing my laptop through the window. My wife was having an affair with a 22-year-old intern, and she'd used his fabricated harassment allegations to remove me from the company we'd built together. It was elegant, efficient, and completely ruthless. I spent the rest of the night documenting everything. I pulled calendar invites, badge swipe records, security logs, and communication archives. I cross-referenced timestamps and rebuilt a complete timeline of events. By morning, I had a folder full of evidence that would make any auditor proud. The question was, what to do with it? I woke up Wednesday morning with the clarity that comes from having your entire life reorganized without your permission. Ember still wasn't home, which told me everything I needed to know about where she'd spent the night. My phone had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, mostly from colleagues who'd heard about my sudden departure. I ignored them all and focused on the task at hand, conducting the most important audit of my career. First, I called our lawyer, Rhonda Martinez, who'd handled our business incorporation and personal legal matters for years. Brooks, I heard there was some kind of incident at the company. Well, that's one way to put it. I need to see you today. It's urgent. How urgent? Marriage ending, company destroying, urgent. She cleared her schedule. Rhonda's office was downtown, in one of those glass towers that made everyone inside feel more important than they probably were. She listened without interruption as I walked her through the events of the previous day and the evidence I'd compiled overnight. So your wife is having an affair with an intern, and she used fabricated harassment allegations to force you out of the company, she summarized. That's the situation. And you have documented proof of the affair and the fabricated evidence. Complete audit trail, timestamps, message headers, the works. Rhonda leaned back in her chair. What do you want to do about it? I want to file a formal response to the harassment allegations. I want a recorded interview with HR and legal present. And I want to submit my evidence through official channels. That will likely destroy your marriage. My marriage was destroyed yesterday. I just didn't know it yet, she nodded. I'll draft the response and request the interview. What about the company? You own 50%. I know, I've been thinking about that too. I spent the rest of the day preparing my formal response. Every allegation Parker had made, I countered with documented evidence. Every screenshot he'd provided, I matched with the original, unaltered version from my backups. Every timestamp, I cross-referenced with badge swipes and security logs that proved I wasn't even in the building when some of the alleged incidents occurred. By Thursday morning, I had a 20-page document that would have impressed any compliance officer. Rhonda delivered it to Ember personally, along with my request for a formal interview. Ember called me an hour later. What are you doing, Brooks? Following company policy for harassment allegations. You should be familiar with it, since you wrote it. We can work this out privately. No, we can't. You made this public when you had security escort me out in front of the entire office. Parker has evidence? Parker has fabricated screenshots that any forensic analyst could debunk in 5 minutes. I have the originals, Ember, all of them. The line went quiet for a long moment. What do you want? She finally asked. I want the truth to come out. I want a fair investigation, and I want to know why you chose to believe a 22-year-old intern over your husband. It's not that simple. Actually, it is. You either trust me or you don't. Yesterday, you made it clear which side of that equation you're on. She hung up. Friday morning, I received a call from Janet Wu, our HR director. She scheduled the formal interview for the following Monday and confirmed that legal counsel would be present for both sides. I spent the weekend organizing my evidence into a presentation that would have made my old audit clients weep with envy. Charts, timelines, cross-references, and supporting documentation. If Ember wanted to play corporate politics, I'd show her what a real professional investigation looked like. Monday arrived gray and rainy, which seemed appropriate for what was essentially the funeral of my marriage and business partnership. The conference room was set up like a deposition. Janet sat at the head of the table with a court reporter. Ember's lawyer, some expensive suit I'd never met, sat on one side. Rhonda and I sat on the other. Parker was there with what I assumed was his own legal representation. Ember wasn't present, which surprised me until I realized she was probably trying to maintain some legal distance from the proceedings. "Let's begin," Janet said. "Brooks, you've submitted a formal response to the allegations made against you. Would you like to present your evidence?" I opened my laptop and connected it to the conference room display. "I'd like to start with the fabricated screenshots that form the basis of these allegations." I pulled up Parker's evidence side by side with the original messages from my backup. The differences were immediately obvious to anyone with basic technical knowledge. As you can see, the message content has been altered, but the timestamps and headers remain consistent with legitimate messages I sent regarding work-related topics. Parker's lawyer leaned forward. "How do we know your so-called originals aren't the fabricated evidence?" I smiled. "Because I have the complete message thread, including messages from Parker that he didn't include in his evidence. Messages that provide context for our communications." I displayed the full thread, showing Parker's work-related questions and my professional responses. Nothing inappropriate, nothing that could be construed as harassment. "Furthermore," I continued, "I have badge swipe records that show I wasn't in the building during several of the alleged incidents." I pulled up the security logs, cross-referenced with Parker's timeline. The discrepancies were glaring. Janet was taking notes furiously. Parker's lawyer was whispering urgently in his ear. "There's more," I said. "I have evidence that suggests these allegations were fabricated to cover up an inappropriate relationship between Parker and a senior executive." I displayed the message thread between Parker and Ember, carefully edited to remove the most explicit content, but leaving enough to make the nature of their relationship clear. The room went completely silent. Parker's face had gone pale. His lawyer was no longer whispering. "These messages show a pattern of personal communication between the intern and the CEO that extends far beyond professional interaction," I continued. "They also show coordination between the two parties in the days leading up to the harassment allegations." I clicked to the final slide, which showed a timeline of events. The escalation of personal messages between Parker and Ember, Parker's research into company harassment policies, and the timing of his allegations against me. "In conclusion," I said, "the evidence shows that these harassment allegations were fabricated to remove me from the company and cover up an inappropriate relationship that violates our own company policies." I closed the laptop and sat back. Janet looked around the room. "I think we need to take a break to review this evidence." As everyone filed out, Parker approached me. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said quietly. "Actually, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm conducting an audit, and you just failed it." Tuesday morning brought the call I'd been expecting. "Brooks, this is Janet. We need to schedule a follow-up meeting. Can you come in this afternoon?" "Of course." "And Brooks, you might want to bring your lawyer again." The conference room setup was different this time. Janet sat with the company's general counsel, a sharp woman named Patricia, who'd always struck me as someone who didn't suffer fools gladly. Ember was present, sitting stiffly in her chair with her lawyer beside her. Parker was notably absent. "Thank you for coming," Patricia began. "We've completed our preliminary review of the evidence you presented yesterday." She opened a folder and pulled out several documents. First, regarding the harassment allegations. Our forensic analysis confirms that the screenshots provided by Parker were digitally altered. The original messages, as you demonstrated, contain no inappropriate content. Ember's lawyer was scribbling notes furiously. Second, we've reviewed the security logs and badge swipe records. Your whereabouts during the alleged incidents are documented and contradict Parker's timeline. Patricia looked directly at Ember. Third, we've discovered additional evidence of policy violations that require immediate attention. She pulled out printed copies of the messages between Ember and Parker. These communications violate our company policies regarding relationships between executives and subordinates, as well as our general conduct guidelines. Ember finally spoke. Those messages were taken out of context. "Ms. Carven, some of these messages explicitly discuss intimate encounters and include coordination to ensure privacy during company hours. There's no context that would make this appropriate." I watched my wife's face as the reality of the situation settled in. She'd been so focused on removing me from the equation that she'd forgotten about the paper trail she was leaving behind. "What are you recommending?" Ember's lawyer asked. Patricia consulted her notes. "Parker's employment has been terminated, effective immediately. The harassment allegations against Brooks are dismissed as unfounded." She looked at me. "Brooks, The company owes you an apology and full reinstatement of your position and access." Then she turned to Ember. "As for you, the board will need to review these policy violations and determine appropriate disciplinary action." Ember's lawyer requested a private consultation, and the meeting was adjourned. I walked out of that conference room feeling vindicated, but not victorious. My marriage was over, and my business partnership was probably finished too. But at least everyone now knew the truth. That evening, Ember finally came home. She found me in my home office updating my resume, not because I needed a job, but because I was pretty sure I wouldn't be staying at Carven Solutions much longer. "We need to talk," she said. "Now you want to talk? 3 weeks ago would have been a better time." She sat down across from me. "I made a mistake." "Which mistake? The affair, the false accusations, or believing I was stupid enough not to figure it out?" "All of it. I was confused, and Parker was a 22-year-old who saw an opportunity and took it. What's your excuse?" Ember looked tired, older than her 36 years. "I don't have one." We sat in silence for a moment. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now? Now I decide whether I want to spend the rest of my life married to someone who threw me under the bus to cover up her own mistakes." "Brooks, please. We can work through this." I closed my laptop and looked at her. "Can we? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you made your choice 3 weeks ago." "I want to try." "What you want is to avoid the consequences of your actions. There's a difference." Wednesday brought another call from Janet. "The board met last night," she said. "They've decided to conduct a full investigation into the company's handling of this situation." "What does that mean?" "It means they're bringing in an outside firm to review everything: policies, procedures, communications, the works." I almost laughed. "An audit." "Exactly. And Brooks, they want you to oversee it." "Me?" "You're the only executive who comes out of this looking clean. Plus, you've already done half the work with your evidence compilation." It was ironic justice. I'd be auditing my own company, investigating the scandal that had nearly destroyed my career. "What about Ember?" "She's been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation's completion." The wheel had come full circle. 3 weeks ago, Ember had placed me on administrative leave based on fabricated evidence. Now she was on leave based on real evidence that I'd provided. I accepted the assignment. Thursday morning, I walked back into Carven Solutions for the first time since my forced departure. The office felt different, charged with tension and whispered conversations that stopped when I passed by. Janine was at the security desk when I entered. "Good to have you back, Brooks." "Good to be back, Janine." She handed me a new access badge. "This one has full building access. Figured you might need it for the investigation." I spent the morning setting up my temporary office and reviewing the scope of the investigation. The board wanted a complete audit of company communications, policy enforcement, and executive conduct for the past 6 months. It was going to be thorough, professional, and absolutely devastating for anyone who'd been playing fast and loose with company rules. Around lunchtime, I got a call from an unknown number. "Brooks, this is Parker." I almost hung up, but curiosity got the better of me. "What do you want, Parker?" "I want to apologize, and I want to explain." "I'm listening." "Ember told me you two were getting divorced. She said you were trying to sabotage the company and that she needed my help to protect it." "And you believed her?" "I wanted to believe her. She was paying attention to me, making me feel important. I was stupid." "Yes, you were." "The harassment allegations were her idea. She helped me create the fake screenshots." I sat up straighter. "Are you willing to testify to that?" "If it means making this right, yes." "Parker, you just gave me the last piece of evidence I needed." Friday afternoon, I submitted my preliminary findings to the board. The report was comprehensive, damaging, and unambiguous. Ember had violated multiple company policies, orchestrated false harassment allegations, and compromised the integrity of our HR processes. More importantly, Parker's confession provided direct evidence of Ember's involvement in fabricating the allegations against me. The board scheduled an emergency meeting for Monday morning. Over the weekend, I made 2 important decisions. First, I was going to resign from Carven Solutions regardless of the investigation's outcome. The company would never feel like home again, and Ember and I couldn't continue as business partners. Second, I was going to file for divorce. I spent Saturday with Rhonda, drafting both my resignation letter and divorce papers. Sunday, I spent alone, thinking about the 5 years Ember and I had built together and how quickly it had all fallen apart. Monday morning arrived clear and cold. I dressed carefully, choosing the same suit I'd worn to our company's first board meeting 5 years ago. It seemed appropriate. The boardroom was full when I arrived. All 5 board members were present, along with Patricia, Janet, and the outside investigators. Ember sat at the far end of the table with her lawyer. Board Chairman Robert Chen called the meeting to order. "We're here to review the findings of the investigation into recent events at Carven Solutions," he began. "Brooks, would you present your report?" I stood and distributed copies of my findings to everyone present. "The investigation has revealed systematic policy violations, fabricated evidence, and abuse of executive authority," I began. I walked through each finding methodically, presenting evidence and testimony that painted a clear picture of what had happened. "In conclusion," I said, "the harassment allegations against me were fabricated by Parker Williams at the direction and with the assistance of CEO Ember Carven, for the purpose of removing me from the company and concealing their inappropriate relationship." Robert looked around the table. "Questions for Brooks?" Board member Sarah Phillips raised her hand. "What's your recommendation for addressing these violations?" I looked directly at Ember. "That's not my decision to make. I'm simply presenting the facts." Robert nodded. "Thank you, Brooks. You can step out while we deliberate." I waited in my office for 2 hours before Janet called me back to the boardroom. "The board has reached its decision," Robert announced. "First, the harassment allegations against Brooks Carven are officially dismissed and expunged from his record." He looked at Ember. "Second, Ember Carven's employment as CEO is terminated immediately for cause, with forfeiture of severance and benefits." Ember's face went white. "You can't do this." "Actually, we can. Your employment contract specifically addresses policy violations and conduct detrimental to the company." Patricia slid a document across the table. "Your access has been revoked, and security will escort you from the building." Robert turned to me. "Brooks, the board would like to offer you the position of interim CEO while we conduct a search for permanent leadership." I stood up and pulled 2 envelopes from my jacket. "I appreciate the offer, but I won't be accepting it." I placed the first envelope on the table. "This is my resignation, effective immediately." Then I placed the second envelope directly in front of Ember. "And these are divorce papers." The room went completely silent. "Brooks," Robert said, "are you sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." I looked around the room one last time, then at Ember. 5 years ago, we started this company because we believed in building something honest and trustworthy. Last month, you chose to protect a lie instead of trusting your husband. That's not the kind of partner I want in business or in life. I picked up my briefcase and walked toward the door. "Brooks, wait," Ember called out. I turned back. "For what? Another lie? Another betrayal? Another chance for you to throw me away when it's convenient?" "I made a mistake." "No, Ember, you made a choice, and now you get to live with the consequences." I walked out of the boardroom, through the office I'd helped build, and out of the building. Janine was at the security desk. "Leaving again?" she asked. "For good this time." "Good luck, Brooks. You deserve better than this place became." I handed her my badge and walked out into the afternoon sun. My phone started ringing before I reached my car. Reporters, colleagues, board members, all wanting statements or explanations or reactions. I turned off the phone and drove home. That evening, I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine and my laptop, updating my LinkedIn profile for the first time in 5 years. Within an hour, I had 3 messages from headhunters and 2 from former colleagues who'd heard about my departure. The tech industry is small, and word travels fast. By morning, everyone would know that Brooks Carven was available and that Ember Carven was unemployed. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Saw the news? If you're interested in starting something new, call me. Mike Davidson." Mike had been our biggest competitor for 3 years before selling his company to a private equity firm. He'd always said he wanted to get back into consulting. So I poured another glass of wine and started typing a response. For the first time in weeks, I was smiling. 3 months later, I was sitting in a coffee shop downtown, reviewing financial projections for Davidson Carven Consulting, when Ember walked in. She looked different, thinner, tired, wearing clothes that suggested her financial situation had changed significantly. She spotted me immediately and hesitated before approaching my table. "Hello, Brooks." "Ember. Mind if I sit?" I gestured to the empty chair across from me. "It's a public place." She sat down carefully, like someone who'd gotten used to being unwelcome. "I heard about your new company. News travels fast. Congratulations. I always knew you'd land on your feet." I closed my laptop and looked at her properly for the first time since the boardroom. "What do you want, Ember?" "I want to apologize. Really apologize, not the corporate speak version I gave you before." "Okay." She took a deep breath. I was scared. The company was struggling more than you knew, and I thought if I could secure some major contracts, we could turn things around. Parker had connections, family money, potential investors. So you slept with him. So I made a series of increasingly bad decisions that culminated in sleeping with him. Yes? I waited for her to continue. When you started asking questions about our financial situation, I panicked. Parker convinced me that if we could get you out of the picture temporarily, he could bring in the investors and save everything. And the harassment allegations? Were supposed to be temporary, a way to keep you away from the books while we fix things. I never intended for it to go as far as it did. I shook my head. You intended exactly what happened, Ember. You just didn't expect me to fight back. She looked down at her hands. You're right. What happened to Parker? He disappeared the day after he was fired. Turns out his family connections and investor friends were as fake as everything else about him. And the company? Dissolved. We couldn't survive the investigation or the publicity. The board liquidated assets and paid out creditors. So my 5 years of work had been reduced to a line item in a bankruptcy filing. It should have hurt more than it did. I'm sorry, Brooks. For all of it, I know you are. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? I considered the question seriously. Maybe someday, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean trusting you again. She nodded. I understand. What are you doing now? Working at a small accounting firm. Entry-level position, but it's honest work. Good for you. We sat in silence for a moment. I should go, she said finally. Ember? She looked up. For what it's worth, I hope you figure out how to be happy, just not at someone else's expense next time. She smiled sadly and left. I reopened my laptop and went back to my financial projections. Davidson Carven was growing faster than we'd anticipated, and we were already talking about hiring our first employees. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike. Just closed the Henderson account. Drinks tonight to celebrate? I typed back, absolutely. I'll bring the contracts for the Morrison deal. 6 months ago, I'd thought my career was over. Now I was building something bigger and better than what I'd lost. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. I finished my coffee, packed up my laptop, and walked out into the afternoon sunshine. There was work to do, contracts to close, and a future to build. The audit trail of my old life was complete. Time to start writing a new one.